In the ancient kingdom of Mbepo, a land where wind carried secrets and rivers hummed with songs of old, stories of magic, betrayal, and strange wonders were as common as the red dust that coated every path. Travelers spoke of talking animals, skies that wept fire, and women who could bend fate with their eyes. But none were as whispered or feared as what happened one moon-swollen night when a stranger crossed the kingdom's threshold. Her name was Adanma, and from the moment her feet touched the earth of Mbepo, the world shifted. She walked alone, cloaked in robes as dark as a starless sky, woven with golden threads that shimmered like sunlit waters. No guards, no caravan, just her, elegant, poised, and so mesmerizing that even the palace watchmen forgot to challenge her. They only stared, caught between confusion and awe. "Is she a spirit?" whispered one. "Or a goddess in disguise?" asked another. The torches lining the path flickered as she passed, casting long shadows that danced behind her. Her scent lingered, a strange, haunting fragrance of wild herbs, old incense, and something that made the heart skip. Some said it smelled like memory. Others said it was danger. From that first moment, Mbepo was never the same. The people watched her glide through the market streets without speaking a word. Elders paused their storytelling mid-sentence. Children stopped their games. Even the town crier, whose voice never ceased, went quiet when he saw her. And then came the royal summons. Oba Okuta, the iron-hearted king of Mbepo, had ruled with pride for decades. His name was feared and respected from the forest clans to the mountain chiefs. But that night, he received word of the stranger with the face of the moon and the walk of a storm. Against his advisor's pleas, he ordered she be brought before him. "She could be danger dressed in beauty," warned his chief elder, a man whose beard was white as bone. "She is mystery," the Oba replied, "and mystery must be understood." The grand hall under pillars carved with the tales of ancestors, Adanma entered with her head high. Oba Okuta sat upon his throne of ebony and lion skins, staring at the woman who made the air around her feel thick and slow. She bowed slightly, not in submission, but in elegance. "I am Adanma of the East Winds," she said, her voice soft, yet firm. "I bring stories, not swords." Curiosity lit the Oba's eyes. "Then come, sit at my table. Let us hear your tales." As the feast began, Adanma spun stories like silk. She spoke of golden deserts where voices echoed in the dunes, forests where trees whispered riddles, and hills where old women sang spells into the ground. Her words dripped with magic, but it wasn't just her stories. It was how she told them. Like she'd lived 1,000 lives and remembered every detail. The Oba listened, mouth open like a boy hearing his first folk tale. Even the palace guards, trained to ignore distraction, leaned in closer. By the next morning, the entire kingdom was talking. "She has wisdom older than time," said the old herbalist. "She is cursed," muttered the butchers. "She's neither," said the washerwomen, "but she's not here for nothing." And they were right. Within days, messengers rode in from every direction. 6 more men arrived in Mbepo, all drawn by the same strange pull. There was Ikemba, the undefeated war chief, whose axe had ended 5 rebellions; Tao, the merchant prince who commanded caravans like rivers flow; Ochieng, the blacksmith whose hammers rang louder than drums; Bakar, the desert lion whose eyes burned hotter than the sun; Ibo, the quiet scholar who read books like they were spirits whispering truth; and Masego, the mountain chief, wise and wild-like, the storm winds that shaped his homeland. Each man came bearing gifts: ivory, fine cloth, carved drums, rare stones, each one a legend. Each one believing he was answering a call that only he could hear, and all of them wanted one thing: Adanma. They gathered in the Oba's grand hall, the room heavy with ambition and hidden envy. Though they nodded politely, every man's eyes were fixed on her. She sat in the center like the sun itself, and they orbited her, each one trying to shine brighter than the next. Not wanting to be outshined, each of the remaining men rushed to outdo the others. One brought golden bracelets shaped like coiled serpents. Another gifted jars of honey harvested from cliffs no hand had touched. There were sacred charms, talking drums, roasted antelope spiced with rare herbs, and even a live leopard tamed, for her pleasure. In every corner of Mbepo, people whispered, "She's more than human," the market women said. "The spirits walk with her," said the elders under the baobab tree. "Or she is a spirit," murmured a young girl hiding behind her mother's wrapper. But Adanma? She simply smiled. She took every gift with grace, her eyes always soft, her words always sweet, yet never promising a single heart to anyone. Instead, she poured oil on the fire of their obsession, feeding it gently, warming it, making sure it never died. She spoke to Ikemba of how powerful his arms were, how strong his heart must be to lead so many men into battle. She praised Tao for his clever trade routes, claiming she had never heard of such wisdom in a man. She listened to Ochieng speak of metal and told him he could shape anything, even fate. To Bakar, she said his presence reminded her of thunder over the desert. To Ibo, she asked questions about ancient languages no one else had patience for. And to Masego, she said his calm power gave her peace. Each man walked away sure that he alone held her gaze longer, that his gift made her heart flutter more. Each man began to burn from the inside. Even Oba Okuta, the great king of Mbepo, grew restless. He could barely sleep. He paced his stone chambers at night and stared at the moon, wondering who she would choose. But Adanma had her own plan. She watched them all, strong men with sharp minds and sharper swords, and began weaving something deeper than charm, something older than love. In the corners of the palace, the servants whispered as they scrubbed floors and lit lamps. "This is not natural," they said. "Have you seen the way they look at her?" They would burn down the kingdom just to get a glance, but none of them dared speak beyond their whispers, because fear had already begun to rise, not from anything Adanma said, but from what they felt in her presence. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into a storm. Unnoticed by all, a slim young man named Makena sat in the shadows. Makena was no warrior, nor merchant, nor king. He was a street performer, a trickster, some said. He told jokes for coins and made goats disappear behind his cloak. But Makena had sharp eyes, and he was watching. While the others fell deeper into Adanma's spell, Makena watched the shift in the air. He noticed how the wind around her always seemed to move the opposite way, how the birds stopped chirping when she entered the garden, how her footsteps never echoed. He had once juggled knives for nobles, made children giggle by pulling beetles from behind their ears, and vanished pebbles with sleight of hand. But these days, his tricks brought him no joy. Something was wrong, deeply terrifyingly wrong. The 7 husbands of Adanma were no longer men. They had become echoes, once mighty, kings, warriors, scholars. They now wandered the palace like shadows at dusk. Their footsteps made no sound. Their eyes, once fierce and wise, stared ahead as if seeing through walls. When spoken to, they nodded politely, but replied with empty words. Makena noticed first when Ikemba, the war chief, forgot the name of his own army. Then Tao, the merchant, stumbled during a simple trade calculation. Ibo, the scholar, had once lectured for hours on constellations. Now he could barely string a sentence together. Even Oba Okuta, king of Mbepo, had begun speaking to invisible figures, answering questions no one asked. Makena's skin prickled. "This is not sorrow," he whispered one night to the moon. "This is sorcery." The palace had grown colder. The walls whispered. Doors that used to creak now opened without sound. Servants stopped humming. At night, a low humming could be heard, not from throats but from deep within the stones themselves. Makena made a choice. He would uncover the truth, even if it meant facing death. That very night, cloaked in a woven wrap, dyed the color of the night sky, Makena crept through a secret corridor behind the palace kitchens. The old passageway was once used by dancers and jugglers to surprise the royal court. Now it served as his silent path into the heart of danger. He moved like a cat, barefoot, breath low, every sound measured. In his palm he carried a charm, a small carved figurine of the trickster god Anyanwu, god of cunning. He kissed it once, for luck, and whispered, "Guide me where only fools dare go." His first destination was the great library, a towering labyrinth-like room at the palace's rear. Its walls were lined with dusty scrolls, ancient manuscripts, and the private journals of past kings. Makena lit a candle, its tiny flame shaking in the windless air. Shadows danced across shelves of forgotten knowledge. "This is where he used to live," Makena murmured, stepping over a broken reed pen. He was thinking of Ebo the scholar, once Mbepo's brightest mind. But now his book sat untouched, his desk abandoned. A torn scroll marked with strange reddish ink caught Makena's eye. As he examined the desk more closely, he found one thing that didn't belong, a hidden tapestry, barely covering a small iron door carved into the stone wall. The symbols on the door were not of Mbepo. They were older, symbols of the forgotten tribes, marks of spirit walkers and soulbinders. Makena's breath caught. He had seen these before, in whispered legends of blood binding. He pulled a bone pin from his belt, the same tool he used for lock tricks. Gently he twisted. The latch clicked. Inside the hidden compartment were 7 ancient books, each one leather-bound, each pulsing with energy. They vibrated beneath his fingers like sleeping hearts. The titles were scrawled in a mix of languages, some dead, some forbidden. The margins of one were filled with Ebo's handwriting, careful and clean. But what made Makena's knees weaken was the phrase repeated across all 7 books. "Bind the blood, silence the will, make kings crawl." He swallowed hard. "These weren't weddings," he whispered. "They were ceremonies, traps." Suddenly, footsteps. Quick. Light. Deadly. Makena snuffed the candle and hid behind a tall bookshelf, slipping between the columns like smoke. The door creaked open. A familiar figure entered, Adanma. She walked like water over stone, slow, deliberate, terrifying in her grace. Her robe shimmered like oil in moonlight. Her eyes glowed faintly, as if lit from within. She stepped toward the cabinet, frowning. Her fingers hovered over the open latch. She froze. She sniffed the air. "Who's here?" she said, not loudly, but with enough power to make the air pulse. Makena held his breath. Sweat trickled down his neck. His heart thudded against his ribs like a drum at war. She looked around the room. Her gaze passed over the shelf behind which he crouched, her fingers curled. Then, after a long silence, she sighed. She closed the cabinet, relocked it, turned on her heel. Hand left. Only when her footsteps were long gone did Makena release his breath. He finally emerged from behind the heavy shelves of the library. His legs were trembling. Sweat clung to his brow and soaked the back of his shirt, despite the chill. That haunted the stone corridors of the palace. He pressed his back against a pillar and breathed slowly, trying to still the pounding of his heart. Now he was sure beyond doubt, that Adanma was no ordinary queen. She wasn't guiding Mbepo with wisdom. She was controlling it with ancient darkness. Makena had seen the blood-binding scriptures himself. He had witnessed her presence cause the very air to shiver. He had seen the empty eyes of the 7 once mighty men. And worst of all, she had almost sensed him. If he had taken one breath louder, one misstep. He swallowed the thought and gripped the tiny carved figurine of Anyanwu, the trickster god. "I have what I need," he whispered. "But I need more than truth. I need a plan." In Mbepo, truth was no longer enough. Everyone was either dazzled by Adanma's beauty or trembling at her power. No one dared question her. No one dared act. But if Makena could not break the spell entirely, perhaps he could shake it. He needed allies, or at least a flicker of resistance from those still under her grip. He began small. In the palace kitchens, he traded jokes for secrets. He sat beside cooks stirring clay pots of pepper soup and casually asked, "Does Oba Okuta still eat roast goat? He used to love it." One cook shrugged. "He barely eats. He stares at his plate like it's a ghost." Another whispered, "The day after she married the last one." The wind inside the palace changed. Makena leaned in. "How do you mean?" The woman looked around and lowered her voice. "It's colder. The oil lamps don't stay lit. And sometimes we hear singing, not from mouths, from the walls." Makena nodded and moved on. In the gardens he found the stable hands and gardeners tending to the royal horses and trimming the hedges. He praised their work, helped trim some vines, and slowly steered the conversation. "The horses, they restless?" he asked. "Since the Queen came," one man replied. "They kick at nothing, they bite their ropes like they hear something we don't." Another added, "One night I heard music, strange music, like drums under water." All of them crossed themselves. No one dared say more. But Makena had heard enough. This wasn't just a spell on men. The entire palace was under a spiritual fog, and then came something that touched him deeply. He found Nalia, the small daughter of Masego, the tribal chief. She sat alone in a stone courtyard beside the family quarters, her eyes red from crying. Holding her father's walking stick tightly, he knelt beside her gently. "Little one," he said, "why are you sad?" She said nothing. Makena pulled out a small puppet he had carved, a smiling monkey made from twine and polished wood. He made it dance clumsily, flipping in the air and covering its eyes. Nalia sniffled. "That's funny," she said. Makena smiled. "Would you like to keep it?" She nodded and clutched it to her chest. "My father used to laugh like that," she whispered. "He used to carry me on his shoulders. Now he just stares at me like he doesn't know who I am." Makena's chest tightened. These men hadn't just lost their power. They had lost themselves, their love, their memories, their children. He knew then. He had to confront one of them. He chose Tao, the merchant. The man had once called Makena brother of the streets and given him gold just for making him laugh. Makena waited until the moon was high. He slipped past the guards into the loading area near the palace walls, where caravans were being packed for trade. Tao stood at the center, overseeing crates of spices and silk. His eyes were glazed. His body moved mechanically. "Tao," Makena whispered. "Old friend." No reply. "Do you remember the Moonlight Bazaar? The children chasing your cats through the crowd? You once laughed so hard you spilled mango juice on your robe." Tao's hand paused mid-motion. His lips parted, just a little. Makena leaned closer. "You gave me a coin, remember? You said, 'Fahip making the world lighter.'" Tao blinked. Something flickered. Then, as if struck by a shadow, his eyes went dull again. He turned, walked away. Makena stood frozen, heart torn between despair and hope. It had been a second. A flicker, but it meant something was still alive inside. If there was a spark, it could be stoked. He would need something powerful, something ancient, to ignite that spark into a flame. He left Mbepo quietly the next morning, traveling far into the forested lands beyond the royal roads. He followed the trail of the river Omeka, where it was said that the Old Ones still whispered through trees. There, deep in the woods, Makena found a wandering shaman, a woman with eyes like storm clouds and hair braided with bones. She sat before a fire of green-blue flames, chanting in a forgotten tongue. He bowed low and told her everything. She listened without blinking. When he finished, she stood and said, "To break a spell like hers, you must call the blood back to itself. Wake the soul from its slumber." She handed him a bundle of herbs wrapped in goat hide. "Grind these, mix them with your blood, simot, for yours is still clean. Then speak these words, not with your mouth but with your heart." Makena nodded, trembling. He returned to Mbepo with the potion hidden in a gourd beneath his robes. He waited 3 nights before the right moment came. Oba Okuta, the first husband, sat alone on a high balcony, overlooking the city he no longer truly ruled. His face was pale in the moonlight, his fingers tapping the stone rail as if playing an invisible drum. Makena crept behind the balcony curtain, breath shallow, hands shaking. He uncorked the gourd, just a few drops into the king's goblet of palm. Wine. Then he stepped back into the shadows and waited. Nothing happened. The moment Oba Okuta took a sip of the potion, the air shifted. He held the goblet firmly as if expecting nothing, but as the bitter taste touched his tongue, a pulse of unseen energy raced through his veins. His body jolted violently, as though lightning had struck his soul. The goblet crashed from his hands, shattering into 100 glittering shards against the stone floor of the royal balcony. His eyes widened in sudden terror. Or was it recognition? From the shadows Makena watched, his hands clenched around the edge of a curtain, his breath caught. The oba staggered backward, clutching the cold railing for balance. Tears welled up in his eyes. His lips trembled. "What? What have I done?" the king whispered hoarsely, the weight of many seasons crashing upon his shoulders at once. It was working. The potion, made from rare herbs, chants of memory, and blood not tainted by Adanma's darkness, was piercing the fog. Makena saw it in the king's eyes: clarity, regret, grief, truth. But it only lasted a heartbeat, because Adanma felt it too. A surge of rage pulsed through the palace like a tremor. The torches along the corridors flared wildly. Shadows warped on the walls. The marble beneath the oba's feet hummed with ancient fury. And then she appeared, not walking, not running, materializing. She emerged from smoke and wind, her robe flowing like blood spilled across fire. Her face, once warm and enchanting, now burned with divine wrath. "Who dares meddle with what is mine?" she hissed, her voice layered, with otherworldly echoes. As if 100 souls spoke through her mouth, Oba Okuta dropped to his knees. The clarity in his eyes faded, his expression twisting in agony. With a flick of her wrist, Adanma hurled a dark chant at him, a word older than Mbepo itself. The sound cracked the night air. The king screamed, clutching his chest. The clarity that had briefly returned was ripped from his soul like cloth from a thorn. Makena, still hidden, pressed his back against the wall, his heart roaring in his chest. She knew someone had tried to break her hold. Makena had failed. Or had he? No. There had been a moment, a powerful one, enough to prove the spell could be broken. But now, more than ever, Makena knew he could not hide. To save the kingdom, he would have to face her. The time for shadows was over. That night, the wind itself seemed to hold its breath. Dark clouds smothered the moon above Mbepo. Torches flickered in their sconces, struggling to stay lit as if the fire feared what was coming. Inside the great hall, Adanma stood at the center, her 7 husbands circling her like silent guardians. They stood tall, lifeless, their gazes empty, but their presence heavy. Adanma wore a robe of blood-crimson silk, embroidered with black glyphs, her hair twisted into serpent-like braids. Her hands glowed faintly, pulsing with the energy of the 7 bound souls she had mastered. At the grand doors of the hall, Makena appeared. He did not wear armor. He had no sword, only a worn pouch at his side, filled with the final version of the countercharm, refined by trial, fear, and hope. His walk was slow but steady. His heart thundered, his mouth was dry, but his eyes held no fear. "Adanma," he said. "You've stolen hearts but not souls. You've twisted power into chains. That ends tonight." She turned slowly. When her gaze met his, the temperature in the room dropped. "You," she spat, "the jester, the insect." "I may be a jester," Makena replied, voice calm, "but even ants can bite lions." She raised a hand and the 7 husbands moved forward. Their eyes were vacant, but their bodies crackled with latent strength. Makena opened his pouch slowly. "I don't come to fight with fists," he said. "I come with truth." He tossed the shimmering powder into the air. It floated like golden dust, swirling toward the bound men. The particles clung to their skin, glowing like fireflies at dusk. A deep silence took hold, and then flickers. Masego blinked and remembered Nalia, his daughter. Bio saw the image of his caravan beneath a full moon, laughter echoing behind it. Ikemba heard war drums, not of conquest, but protection. Ibo remembered a scroll his father had given him, and the pride in his eyes. The memories rippled between them like waves crashing against Adanma's walls of control. She screamed, flinging a bolt of crackling red magic toward Makena. He dove aside. The marble floor behind him exploded into splinters, but the men began to move, not as puppets but as people. One by one, their eyes sharpened. "I am not your slave," Masego growled. "I remember who I am," Bio said, fists clenched. Adanma snarled, spinning with unnatural speed, throwing curse after curse. The very walls of the palace began to tremble. But it was too late. The chain had broken. Their souls, once muzzled, now surged with ancient force. Makena stood behind them, breathing hard, watching the impossible unfold. "You taught us to kneel," said Oba Okuta, stepping forward. "But now we rise," Tao added, his voice steady. Adanma's body lifted from the ground, her power boiling around her like a cyclone. The air screamed. Light and shadow danced in violent war. She let out a final roar, a sound of pain, pride, and fury, and hurled all her strength into a single blast. The 7 men stood together, shoulders touching, arms forward, souls awakened. They met her. Blast with their unity. A radiant surge of golden energy formed not from magic but from memory, love, and purpose. The clash of forces exploded like thunder trapped in a cave. The windows shattered, the roof trembled, and when the light faded, Adanma was gone. All that remained was a faint swirl of black smoke that faded into nothing, like a nightmare leaving the morning sky. Silence filled the great hall. The men stood, dazed but free. Their robes scorched, their brows sweating, but their souls whole. The doors burst open. Servants, guards, villagers, they poured in and stopped in stunned awe. They looked at the 7 men they had once feared, at the trickster who had defied the impossible, at the palace, now humming with peace, and then someone began to clap, then another, and another, until the hall thundered not with battle but with joy. Outside the clouds parted, a single beam of moonlight broke through the sky, shining down on Makena as he stepped into the courtyard. The wind kissed his cheeks cool and clean. He looked up, smiled faintly, and said, "The storm is over." In the days that followed, Mbepo began to heal. Oba Okuta resumed the throne, but this time not as a ruler of power, but of peace. Ikemba trained young warriors not for conquest, but protection. Tao reopened trade routes and offered goods to distant villages for fair price. Ochieng returned to his forge, crafting not weapons of war but tools for rebuilding. Ibo reopened the royal library and invited every child in Mbepo to read. Bayo sang old songs in the marketplace. Again Masego went home, and Nalia ran into his arms, weeping with joy. As for Makena, he did not stay. One morning before the sun had fully risen, he slipped out of the palace gates, a small bag on his back, a new puppet in his hand. No fanfare. No goodbye. Just a soft grin and the road ahead, because the world was wide. And somewhere out there, another kingdom would need reminding that no spell is unbreakable when courage, truth, and unity walk hand in hand. This tale reminds us even the most powerful force, clothed in beauty, fear, and enchantment, can fall, when even one person dares to stand for truth. Adanma's downfall teaches that power gained through control and deceit is always temporary, and Makena's rise shows that courage, wit, and heart, even from the unlikeliest hands, can ignite a revolution. When hearts remember who they are, no chain can hold them. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell so you never miss another powerful tale from the heart of Africa. Share this story with someone who believes that even the smallest spark can light a fire of change. Until next time, Stay wise, stay bold, and keep the stories alive.